Ayy, look, ayy. I'm in the lab like Dexter, brand new batch he tested. I'm with all the extras, don't try and bitch, I'm pressure. I'm the type to step on steppers, I'm the type to step on steppers. I'm the type to step on steppers, I'm the type to step on steppers.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the New Media Podcast. I'm your host, Ya. We hope you enjoyed the last episode because, as always, today is going to be an even better episode. I got the whole crew with me. Everybody's in the house today. And today, just like how we talked about in our last episode, we're doing a little bit of a recap of Super Bowl 58. The NFL season has finally come to a close. We finally have our Super Bowl champion. And for this year's Super Bowl 58 winner, the Kansas City Chiefs, they were able to go on to defeat the San Francisco 49ers in overtime, 25-22. So we'll go ahead and get our thoughts from that game. I know we have a lot to say about it. But of course, before we jump into all of that, temperature check, how's everybody doing?
I mean, it was definitely I think a good conclusion to an otherwise decent NFL season. One that I won't be looking back at thinking, that was a great NFL season. But for the Chiefs, I mean, we're gonna get to them in a bit, but I mean, this team is a dynasty at this point. I mean, Patrick, if he already hasn't, Andy Reid has solidified himself. Travis Kelce has solidified himself. I mean, this team. What is there left to say? And then Kyle Shanahan, I mean, just heartbreak after heartbreak. But other than that, I'm happy I didn't see an NFC team win, especially the 49ers. I wasn't excited at the prospect of them winning. The whole game I was at the edge of my seat. But it's good to see a different team win instead of the 49ers.
To be in a room full of 13 Niner fans, to be the only Seahawks fan there watching the Super Bowl with them, to see their faces just go from here to there in a matter of seconds. What a joyful Sunday. What a joyful Sunday. And, it was a great year of football. Somewhat up and down with the quarterback play. I feel like defenses were much better, but it's a great way to conclude the season. 49ers to lose in a fashion like that, like they usually do in Super Bowls, to choke. It was a great Sunday for me.
Yeah, man. Patrick Mahomes will do that to you. Even when you feel like you have the game won, you feel like you have the game in your hands. Whatever you've done to get to that point is still not enough, man. But overall, glad that we got a nice, enjoyable Super Bowl. Wasn't as high scoring as the last one, but still very entertaining in both halves, regardless of how defensive it was. But overall, a good close to the NFL season. But aside from all that, let's go ahead and get to this game, man. Let's go ahead and get some takeaways.
I mean, first off, you to give credit to the D-line in that first half of the game. I mean, they were pressured. I haven't seen Mahomes pressured like that in a while. Like they were, Chase Young made it a habit to be in the backfield. Nick Bosa was getting pressure. Eric Armstead was getting pressure. I think they did a very good job in the first half of limiting Patrick Mahomes. I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs weren't really getting anything much on offense. They had that big play to Mecole Hardman in that first half. But other than that, I mean, the team wasn't really doing much. Patrick Mahomes, it wasn't until later in the third quarter that they were able to find some success. But this 49ers D-line, in that first half of the game especially, they were making sure to get home, and they were doing a good job of it. But, early on in the game, there's some mistakes. You have a rare Christian McCaffrey fumble, and then you have that Chiefs punt where they fumble that as well. And then on the other side, you have Isaiah Pacheco with his own fumble. I mean, you had some mistakes on both ends that could have ended up costly, and for one team, it did. And for Kyle Shanahan, I mean, a lot of people are going to say, why didn't he run the football? I mean, Christian McCaffrey ran the football for a decent amount of times. I think he had a pretty 31 touches for football. So I think that's a healthy amount of touches. Maybe in the second half a bit, they could have made it a habit to run even more. But even then, they had limited success on the ground. That's just the reality of things. They weren't getting much on the ground. And, Brock Purdy, I will say this, I've been a critic of him, but I don't think he played bad enough that it would have costed him, but I don't think he played good enough where it's like, okay, he could have came out with the win. I think he just played a pretty decent game. I don't think he had some efficient plays, but at the same time, there were some plays where I feel like, that was what Cam Newton was referring to, a game changer. There are a couple of plays where, Chris Jones did get pressure to him, but if I feel like it's a different quarterback, the result's going to be 2 touchdowns. And then, there's a lot of criticism about Kyle Shanahan, whether or not, they should have went for on 4th and 4. But, I'm the type of person right there that I'll take my points in overtime. But what I am just absolutely confused about is the whole them not being aware of the strategy and not even having an idea about the overtime rules. I mean, that's just a complete lack of preparation, man. You just don't go into a game like this not knowing, what's the result. If we go into overtime, what's the strategy here? Should we defer? And they had no clue about that. And you give Patrick Mahomes that much time, and he's gonna do what Patrick Mahomes does, even if he's limited all game. That's the threat of having a quarterback like that. And this guy is just unbelievable. For him to have 3 Super Bowls by this age, I mean, his legacy is solidified. Now he's chasing after Brady. That's the reality. That's the idea now. He's going after Brady, and this team is just I don't even know what else to say. I can't pick it against them anymore. It's just impossible. This is the worst version of their offense, and they still won the Super Bowl. So, hats off to them, man. This team's a dynasty. This team's absolutely solidified.
So happy, man. Like, Kyle Shanahan, once again, this is his 3rd Super Bowl, once as offensive coordinator, twice as a head coach. And to me, it's baffling. Just those second half drop offs that he has in every one of those games. Your defense played phenomenally well the first half of that game, allowing only Mahomes to have 3 points, the Chiefs to only scored 3 points, and successfully you come off. I feel like the offense was not too bad in the first half. They're running the ball. CMC had a touchdown. He was doing his thing, but second half defensively was a whole different thing to me. I feel like they weren't getting to him. There was a couple. I mean, he converted 2 or 3 4th down plays, and it was 4th and 2 or 4th and 1, and Mahomes is right here running the option, and he's getting first down, 15 yards on his legs and stuff, and they weren't containing that. And to me, it feels like second half defensively they took a hit big time, and they didn't respond with what they should have responded with, like how they came out in the first half. I feel like Shanahan didn't exemplify that, and going into that halftime, telling them, "Yo, keep your foot on the gas. We have him in the perfect spot. We only gave up 3 points. We're playing phenomenal defense. All you have to do is just game manage the game," and they couldn't do that. And obviously, it's tough to game manage the game for Mahomes. And second half they came out and they started swinging. And they put up 22 points on the board. So for me, Niners, it's the same issue as always, man. It goes to coaching. It goes to the quarterback. It goes to them going away from the game plan. And to me, you really can't blame the defense a lot. They were playing stout for much part of the game. And offensively, I feel like Purdy could have hit a couple passes, but having Kittle non-existent in the game, having Ayuk barely, involved in the pass game. Shout out to Jawan Jennings. He played phenomenal. He threw a touchdown pass. He caught another touchdown pass, and he had a couple big 3rd downs. But you got to get the ball to your key playmakers, man. And I feel like Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle weren't involved as much on the offensive side of the ball in that second half. McCaffrey was getting a lot of touches. I think he ended up, like Andy said, 31 touches, I think 80 rush yards, 80 receiving yards. He was involved a lot, but you got other players that can score. You got other star players on your team on the offensive side of the ball. So I feel like they keyed in. They turned up the blitz on the Niners. They were blitzing. And McDuffie, shout out to him, man. He was making plays on the field, and especially on that 3rd and 4 where he blitzed and he was right there in Purdy's face. I felt like that was one of the biggest plays of the day. And shit, it happened, So shout out to the Chiefs, man. Shout out to their defense. Mahomes, top 2 to play the game already, probably. He's right behind Brady. He got 3 rings on his resume, 3 Super Bowl MVPs. One of the best to play. One of the best to play the game. So it was a great game yesterday. It was good to see the Niners lose.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to spend the entire day trying to figure out where things went wrong for the Niners in this matchup. With how well the first half went for them, you come out of the first half up 10-3. You have the Kansas City Chiefs right where you want them, not necessarily being able to move the ball down the field. A lot of 3 and outs, 3 points being on the board for them. This is kind of where you want them. And once you have them where you want them, you kind of don't take your foot off the gas. And so the turning point for me for this Niners team really came when they came out of the second half, start of the 3rd quarter, where they went away from something that's not their identity necessarily, but something that's helped them get here, which is running the ball. with Christian McCaffrey. Like I mentioned in our last episode, the game plan for Kyle Shanahan should have been very, very simple. When it comes to a guy like Christian McCaffrey, a guy that you traded for last year right before the deadline, the guy who's the best running back in all of football, you have to empty out the clip with him at the running back position. You're going to live and die with Christian McCaffrey running the football. And I understand that, that they only averaged about 3.5 yards a carry, and it wasn't necessarily as successful as they would have hoped. But at the end of the day, in order for you to milk as much clock as possible, you have to be able to run the ball and just give Christian McCaffrey a chance. Ignore the fumble that he had on the very first drive of the game. Ignore the fact that he may or may not get hurt if you run him to the ground with X amount of touches. You're already in this position. You're in the Super Bowl. All the chips are on the table for you. You got to live and die with Christian McCaffrey. And I said this in our last episode. Kyle Shanahan needed to lean on him in order for their offense to get going. Their offense really never got going in this entire game. It wasn't necessarily as consistent as I thought it would be, even with the little slight runs, the little good runs that we saw from Christian McCaffrey. Didn't necessarily do a good enough job at opening up the pass game for a guy like Brock Purdy. But if you only give your running back 2 touches in the third quarter, it's going to be an extremely long day, or extremely long half, I should say, for you to win. And that's pretty much where the turning point was. You come out of the third quarter, and all of a sudden, Kyle Shanahan, once again with a double-digit lead in the Super Bowl, you want to start throwing the ball a lot more. And I don't understand it. I personally believe Kyle Shanahan really wanted to prove his point to the world that Brock Purdy was his quarterback. He really wanted Brock Purdy to get this Super Bowl MVP. That way he could look like the biggest genius in the world. Brock Purdy gets all the praise in the world, and at the end of the day, they go home as Super Bowl champions. But that just didn't happen. Why go away from something that's helped you get all the way to this point? And if you're giving Christian McCaffrey 2 touches in the third quarter, 2 rushing attempts in the third quarter, you're not going to win any football games. And Kyle Shanahan specifically, man, like I mentioned not too long ago, three double-digit leads blown in the Super Bowl, 1 as an offensive coordinator, 2 as a head coach, and 2 against the same team. At some point, I think you got to look yourself in the mirror and tell yourself, or ask yourself, is what I'm doing, right? I know I'm an offensive guru. I can scheme up the best schemes in the world. I can make plays out of nothing and make other guys that aren't necessarily the greatest look good. And I could work with what I have. But when it gets to the biggest moments, when the lights are the brightest, when the stage is set, am I capable enough as an offensive coordinator, as the head coach of this team that calls the plays to get the team in the right position to win? And I don't think Kyle Shanahan is the guy for it, man. I understand he might be, one of the greatest offensive coordinators or offensive minds that we have in the football world today. But at some point, you got to ask yourself, man, are you capable enough to do it, to get the job done? Because if you have 3 double-digit leads in the Super Bowl, there's no way in hell you should be 0-3, man. There's no way in hell. And all the situations that he's been a part of, not even just the Super Bowl alone, he's also had a lead in the NFC Championship game against the Rams as well. They all start to add up at some point. And so Kyle Shanahan is the number 1 guy at fault here for sure. He's the guy that leads. He's at the top of the list for me. And then when you go down the list as well, you got to put a little bit of blame on Brock Purdy. Like Abdi said, I don't think he played a terrible game, but I don't think he played a great game. So he's kind of in that gray area right in the middle. And this was probably the best moment for him to kind of move up the ranks a little bit. But unfortunately, he went the opposite direction. Everybody's going to have something to say about Brock Purdy going into this next season, going into this entire offseason. Everybody that wanted to say something good about him can't now because of the Super Bowl performance that he just had. And now I'm starting to question how much of an upgrade is Brock Purdy in comparison to a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, because I look at both Super Bowl matchups 4 years ago against Kansas City. They had Jimmy Garoppolo under center. And the only difference that I could take away from both these matchups and both these quarterbacks is that Brock Purdy had 0 turnover-worthy plays in comparison to Jimmy Garoppolo's 2 turnover-worthy plays. And so you look at the points put up on the board. The Niners put up 20 points in that first Super Bowl matchup 4 years ago. They put up 22 points in this Super Bowl matchup yesterday. I'm trying to find the difference between the two guys. The whole point, of trying to get back to this point and to move off from a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo was to bring in a guy that's going to elevate this offense and get them over their hump. And, for this Niners team, I'm not too sure if Brock Purdy is going to be that guy that can get them over this hump, because this was the moment to prove it. But to get back to the game overall, that was my turning point where they decided to go away from Christian McCaffrey. And then pretty much the nail in the coffin was that Ray McLeod punt situation. I wouldn't necessarily call it a muff punt. It hit the back of a defender's foot. People can argue whether or not he should have just, decided to just hop on the ball instead of trying to be a little bit of a hero, try to pick it up and gain some extra yards. But, that's neither here nor there. And it's kind of being put in a situation where you don't necessarily know what to do at that point. You just kind of have to go with your instincts. And in that moment, that was what his instincts was, just to go into that, try to be a little bit of a hero. And then when you give Kansas City a little bit of life, they're not going to, shy away from the moment. The Chiefs, they're the team that's always going to rise when the lights are the brightest. You put them in any situation, you put them in any environment. When their best is required, they're the guys that are going to bring their best to the table. That's the best way I could put it. Thinking about this game all day, Kansas City, even when you feel like you have them on the ropes, it's not even close, man. It's not even close. Patrick Mahomes, the moment's never too big for him. The lights are never too bright for him. Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator, Travis Kelce, they just know how to win. And when they need to be perfect, they're going to be perfect. And when they got that first touchdown right off the muffed punt return, everything pretty much flipped on its head. And in a game where they didn't necessarily have any momentum going for them, they did what they were supposed to do and get a win in overtime. And this Chiefs team, man, once again, back-to-back Super Bowls, first team to do it since Tom Brady. And, they're reaching this point where every year from here on out is a year where we have to just sit here and say the Kansas City Chiefs are going to win the Super Bowl. Whether we like it or not, I just feel like we can no longer be confident in our own personal franchises. We can't be confident in any other franchise that we may think may have a chance at winning the Super Bowl. I think we just need to, put our hands up and just understand that there's not a guy that can compete, not a quarterback in the league that can compete with Patrick Mahomes. There's not a head coach that can compete with Andy Reid, and there's not a team out there that can compete with this Kansas City Chiefs team. Because at the end of the day, even when they're at their lowest, even when they have all their trials and tribulations, at the end of the day, they're going to figure out a way to get it done. And so even when they're not at their best, that's like an opportunity given to you, and you better take that opportunity. And it may not even be good enough in the end. And this is a perfect example of everything not necessarily going their way this year, having to go on the road two games in an AFC Championship game. If you look at the road that they had to take to get here, they beat the Miami Dolphins that had a very explosive offense. They had to go into Buffalo and beat a red-hot Bills team. They had to go into Baltimore and beat the number one team in the AFC. And then once again, they beat the number one seed in the NFC. And so, this is something that we're going to have to talk about, moving forward, and going into next season, how dangerous of a team or how confident are we in the Kansas City Chiefs, going for a three-peat? That's the question that we got to ask ourselves.
I mean, they're definitely going to go out and grab a wide receiver, or at least retool that wide receiver room. The thing that I'm worried about is, their defense. Are they going to be losing some guys? You have Chris Jones there, and you have Snead there as well. And so the question marks is, how good is their defense going to be, next season? And, I already said I wouldn't bet against Patrick Mahomes, but 3 times is a feat. That's just absurd, to do it 3 times in a row. Of course, we said doing it 2 times, especially with how this team's look, is kind of crazy, but doing it 3 times. But I definitely think that, confidence level, would be at least an 8.5 for this team, to do it again, just because this offense, I don't think it'll ever be as bad as it was this season. The defense might take a little step back, maybe a bigger step back, depending on, the guys that they can retain. But, as it is, 8.5 for sure.
For me, if they can keep Chris Jones, man, why not? The offense is going to get retooled. They're going to get some, additions. They're going to go in the free agency, try to get a top 15 to 20 receiver on their team to pair up with, Kelce and Rasheen Rice. And, if they can keep Chris Jones on that defensive side of the ball, I feel like They're going to be right back at it. We doubted them this year. We had a lot of questions about how the offense was going to look throughout the season, who's going to be their number one target, Kelsey's decline, this and that. And like he said, playoff run. If you look at it, it's one of their best playoff runs, probably one of the best playoff runs we've seen in a while, taking out Miami and then taking out the Bills and then Baltimore and then taking out the Niners. Every game they played in was a slugfest, against the top of the top teams in the NFL. They're going against the best of the best, and they're coming out swinging and they're coming out winning. So, Tom Brady, he created rule number one. Rule number one, you never bet against Brady. Rule number two is getting put in the book. I don't think I ever get bet against this guy Mahomes. So if he's in that Super Bowl again, you're not going to see me going against him. Unless it's against the Seahawks. But other than that, it's tough to beat this guy.
And that's the thing, man. That's the thing. When we talk about Tom Brady, as a Brady fan, it didn't matter any game that he was going into. I was always confident that he was going to win. And we're kind of in the same situation that we were with him, where everybody's now getting tired of seeing Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl, and then let alone winning the Super Bowl. And if you're a Patrick Mahomes fan, you're going to enjoy every second of it, because this is something that's never going to be done again, or it may not ever be done again, because we don't necessarily see quarterbacks like this. If you're a Brady fan, you enjoyed it, and if you're a Mahomes fan, you're currently enjoying it, and it's fair. That's fair. I gotta put my hands up and admit, I'm not a Mahomes guy at all, and it's not nice seeing the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl every year, and it's not nice seeing them go back to back. But that's what happens when you have the second greatest quarterback to play the game right after Tom Brady, and that's just a situation we're put in every year. Like I said, it doesn't matter who we root for. There's no way in hell that we can just sit here and go against this Kansas City Chiefs team. There's no way we can go ahead and go against Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. We just can't do it confidently. We may do it, but we can't do it confidently. All of today, I've been seeing comparisons saying, or conversations talking about, well, there's only one guy that can beat him, and it's Joe Burrow. And even as a Joe Burrow guy, I'm not going to sit here and be delusional and say next year Joe Burrow got him once he comes back healthy, and once they get their situation right, that's going to be a guy that can take down Patrick Mahomes, because he did it one time. We asked him to do it again the following year, and he wasn't able to do it. And so that's just what we're put in right now. And so aside from all of that, I think I'm confident in believing in this Chiefs team going back to back, man, because even if they lose pieces, somehow, some way, they're going to go into the draft and they're going to try to replace those pieces that they've lost as best as they can. They're going to go into this offseason, make the necessary moves that they need to make. And next thing you know, even when their offense isn't looking too good, or even if their defense isn't looking too good, we could say, I remember we all said that they might go out in the first round of the playoffs if they play the Cleveland Browns, and next thing you know, they're winning the Super Bowl. And so, it doesn't necessarily matter at this point anymore. If these guys somehow, some way, barring any injuries, get to the playoffs, they're going to get themselves to an AFC Championship game, and they're going to get themselves to another Super Bowl. So I'm extremely confident in them three-peating, because like I said, you only get these special quarterbacks every once in a while, and we're lucky enough to get these two great quarterbacks, greatest of all time type quarterbacks, back to back. We don't necessarily have a long gap in between the two. But aside from the Kansas City Chiefs and all the glory and all the praise that they've been getting these last 24 hours, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the San Francisco 49ers football team. And, for the last 3-4 years consecutively, we've talked about this Niners team. And
the window is shut. If you're going to ask me that, I'll go
That
ahead.
is my question. Is their window, is their Super Bowl window closed?
This is not going to happen again, bro. I don't care, bro. No, at this point, because they have a lot of decisions to make this offseason with their roster. I just think, Brock Purdy, I think they should retain him. I think it makes sense. He should be their guy. And as much as I criticize him, he's performed to what they kind of expected him to, or at least what they've hoped him to be. And so, for me, my idea is, well, I mean, you've had multiple chances to be here. The NFC was at its absolute weakest this season, to be honest. I feel like the NFC, in terms of even just quarterback, was at its lowest. Now, you're gonna have the Detroit Lions getting better. You have a lot of these other teams, getting healthy again. The Eagles are definitely gonna be back here. You have the multitude of teams that are just gonna get better, and so I feel like in terms of competition, the NFC is going to get better, and I just don't see Kyle Shanahan's always going to be a great coach, and he's always going to build a great team. And to be honest, the Niners probably might win the division again next year, but for them to go back to the Super Bowl and to win it, I just don't see it at all. I just feel like at this point, there's just too much heartbreak.
I just don't see it happening. I felt like they got lucky against the Packers, and then they got lucky against the Lions, and their luck right now against the Chiefs. I feel like this upcoming year, obviously they're probably gonna have majority of the same roster. They do have some key decisions to make on some defensive players, some offensive players, but I do feel like majority of the players are gonna come back. And I mean, once I feel, we know what they do. It's just like the Cowboys. We know what they do season wise, and what we expect from them in the playoffs is completely different. Not the playoffs, but NFC championship game is going to be completely different. So maybe they do get back to the dance. I just don't expect them to win it. I think they probably lose in the NFC championship game next year, but I just don't expect them to win the Super Bowl, especially with Kyle Shanahan. I feel like there's been too much heartbreak. They've been close, back-to-back times, up double digits heading into the second half, and they couldn't come out. So, I feel like that's going to take a mental on, some players on the team, especially for the players that have been there twice, and Cal Shanahan too. So, me, they'll probably get back there to the NFC Championship, so very close to it, and ain't coming home with silverware.
And that's the thing. I don't want to play devil's advocate, but I was thinking about it when I look at the roster construction and the way that in the contract situations that they're in right now. They're playing against the cap. Their cap space isn't the greatest whatsoever. They've paid a lot of guys so much money, and that's because they've built a roster trying to surround a quarterback that's currently under a rookie contract. When you don't have to pay your quarterback, there's a lot of money that can go around and to build the roster the way you want to build it. And so a lot of these guys, a lot of their key guys that are playing for him are under contract up until 2025 at the earliest. And then when I look across the board and I look at the NFC as a whole, I'm trying to see what team can compete with them. Obviously they had their ups and downs throughout the course of their whole playoff run, getting to the Super Bowl where they almost lost against the Packers, where they almost lost against the Lions. But at the same time, those losses, those almost losses were just almost losses. They weren't necessarily losses. And you come back the following year, how much better is the NFC getting when you look across the board? Philadelphia had one of the best seasons in recent history for them, going back to the year they won the Super Bowl against the Patriots, and they came back crashing down coming off a cliff, losing in the first round to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Dallas Cowboys, we know what they're about every regular season. Come postseason time, they're a one and done team. You go ahead and talk about the Detroit Lions. Who knows if they'll be back in that situation again in the NFC Championship game? Are they good enough to make the postseason? Of course, they're probably going to be competitive, be a competitive team next year, so they'll probably be back. But every other team after that, I'm trying to find the threat to this Niners team. And the way that I look at it is I feel like the Niners pretty much control their own destiny when it comes to running the NFC as a whole. But with how much time is left with all these guys under their current roster, current contract, time isn't necessarily on their side. So if I had to really put a shut on their window, I wouldn't necessarily say it would be this past season that right now is the end of the Niners run. The way I view it is I just feel like they have at least one more run in them before a lot of guys just decide that the time is it's never going to work in the situation, or some guys just decide that like a guy like Trent Williams is getting up there in age. If he's unable to get back to the Super Bowl to get a chance, to win the Super Bowl next year, he might just call it a career because he's getting up there. And with all the cap situations and Brandon Ayuk getting a fifth year and he's due $14 million next season, you probably want to get him on an extension if possible. It's going to be tough. There's going to be a lot of decisions that they have to make, this year and moving forward, because at the end of the day, the reality of this whole situation is that you never go into the next year with the same group that you had the previous year. That doesn't happen in the NFL. Some guys go, some guys stay, some new guys come in. And that's just the reality of the sport. So you never necessarily, run it back with the same group. You might have the main core, but you'll never have, the full roster from top to bottom, from the key contributors. And so, for this Niners team, going into this offseason, I think this is their final shot. When we talk about the NFL season in August of this year, the same way we talked about the Buffalo Bills this year, it being their last dance, is the same way we're going to be talking about this 49ers team and whether or not it's going to be their last dance. And, if they aren't able to get it done, if they aren't able to get over if they aren't even able to get past the NFC Championship game or even get to it, will be a discussion that we can have at a further date. But when I look at the NFC as a whole, I'm trying to find a team that can knock this team off. And if Philadelphia ain't able to get it right, there's not going to be a team that can get it right against this team. And teams can try, but Dallas was a one and done team. Detroit had an opportunity, but a lot of these teams are either too inexperienced or just don't necessarily have enough talent to overcome what the Niners have as a whole, as a roster as a whole. But it is what it is. What it is, man. This is a discussion that we can definitely have at a later date. With the NFL season coming to a close, there's going to be a lot more for us to talk about. In the whole NBA world, we'll finally put this NFL chapter to rest for a little while. We have free agency coming up in about 2.5-3 weeks. So there'll be some moves, from players going from different teams. Some players may be saying put in their current destination. And then we have the NFL draft in April. And then we have that little brief pause from May all the way up until late July where, OTAs open up, and then we have the training camp. But, the next time we're going to be in-depthly talking about football in depth will be August again. And when things pick back up, we'll see what players land where and, how teams are looking. But, with that being said, man, we're closing out another NFL season together. Any final words before we close out the episode as a whole?
We were saved from a Brock Purdy Super Bowl.
I was saved from a 49ers Super Bowl. Not even Brock Purdy, just the Niners Super Bowl. Jeez.
I mean, I don't think I was saved by anything, man. I think I was, I'm hurt by another Patrick Mahomes Super Bowl. But, the one thing I can do is I can respect greatness when I see it. And so, overall, I'm glad this NFL season has come to a close. Not necessarily one that, we'll probably remember, a lot. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. And, as always, we'll always move forward. And like I said, we'll have a lot more to talk about, at a later date. But with that being said, I'll go ahead and close out this episode here. Thank you so much for tuning in into today's episode. We really appreciate your love and support. We greatly appreciate it if you like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at New Media Podcast. And for those of you that are watching us on YouTube, all of our social media handles will be at the end of this video. And if you're listening to us on Apple and Spotify, if you go to our Instagram page at New Media Podcast, you'll be able to navigate yourself to all of our social media handles there. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, as always, we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Record a new hit, then we making us a film. Wouldn't sign a deal if I got a couple mil. Been in the lab, now they throwing out deals. Me and now Lakes, now that's overkill.